Ingrain can be a nightmare for the woodworker. It always wants to stain darker than the rest of the project. Here's a piece of red oak. I stained it with walnut. The surface here is probably at least one shade lighter than the ingrain. How do you stop that? Well, got a couple ideas for you. Let's take a look. Woodworkers typically use two kinds of stains. You use an oil-based stain that you buy at the box store, and they use dye stains. Oil-based stains are more common and really less expensive. Dye stains in little bottles can be really expensive. But what do you do to prevent that blotching and darkening of the ingrain? I've got some scraps here. I'm about out of scraps. If you've been watching my channel, you know I've been using my scraps up. But woods that are particularly bad about blotching and the ingrain darkening when you stain it. This is a piece of Baltic birch plywood. Birch and any kind of plywood is particularly bad about blotching. Of course, the ingrain is, just wide open. This is an old piece of yellow pine. Pine blotches real bad, and the ingrain darkens very bad. The only piece of Douglas fir I had, it's not even a decent piece of scrap, but this is Douglas fir, and it is really bad about blotching on the surface and darkening on the ingrain. Now, why does that happen? Because the ingrain is like little straws. It goes all the way up the tree. That's how the tree feeds itself, is through these little straws. And when you put stain on there, it's just like a sponge. It just sucks it right in. Much different than the surface here. So, what can we do to stop that? Well, there's a couple of things you can do. First of all, you can sand down to 220 on the flat surfaces. Give it a good sanding. Then on the ingrain, go at least 2 grits finer than the surface here, and that will help some. And I'm going to show you that. I'll stain this board. Now this pine is really rough. I sand the surface with 150, and I'm sanding this with 180. But you'll see that it'll stain really dark. Here, this is 150. So let me get the stain in here, and I'll stain these up, and I'll come back and show you what they look like. Okay, I've stained these pieces. You'll see the Douglas fir here. It's got some dark spots. If this is a big board, it would really show up. But look at the ingrain. Ingrain is almost black. And that was after sanding it quite a bit. That just won't work for a project. Here's that piece of pine. Look how dark, how different the grain stain. I think that's probably more of a dynamic range of colors than what you'd probably want for a project. It looks almost like it's tiger skin. And then of course the end is just absolutely black. This is the plywood. Looks a little blotchy. In is again dark. So what do you got to do? Well, there's a couple of things. First of all, for the flat surfaces, you can use what's called pre-stain. And it's just a matter of rubbing the pre-stain on. You don't even have to let it set. Rub it on like that. And then come back with your stain. Now I want you to look at the difference. Like take this piece of Douglas fir. How dark, light. Here's the pine. Look at that side. Now look at this side. Here's your plywood. Big difference. But it doesn't do so well. Here, I'll put it on the end grain, just dip it in, wipe it off. But it didn't do much for the end grain. So how do you fix end grain? Well, let me show you a trick that I've learned. Okay, what you do is you take a little water, just a little dab there, and you mix it about half and half with yellow glue. You just want a real thin solution of glue here. And it looks kind of milky like that. Then you paint the end of your wood. Now you got to sand it, like I suggested before, at least 1 grit finer. Just paint it up a little yellow glue and then let that dry. We'll do the fir as well. I've already sanded the pieces. Let that soak in a little bit. And let it dry. Okay, I let these two dry. Now, I'll put some stain on there and we'll see what happens. Okay, there's the difference between the pine board. And if you think it's a little dark, the thing you can do is just sand a little bit and it'll lighten right up. But see, it's much closer now to what the surface grain looks like. Look at the difference. You know, even this board, look at the difference. And again, you can sand it a little bit and it'll lighten right up. Now you can sand on this piece a lot. And see, I sanded the same amount. It didn't lighten at all. So, you can get much closer color if you take a little yellow glue, thin it with water, and put it on the end grain. And woods like pine, Douglas fir, birch, even poplar, these woods will all blotch and the end grains will stain really dark. All end grains will, you know, even the oak. You saw the oak there, how it darkened. And to sand something like this, why, you know, you're going to change the size of your piece, you're going to have to sand so much off the end there. So I think you can see the difference. Tremendous difference. You know, even maple will blotch and the end grain will do this, as hard as it is and as fine as the grain is. So anyway, that's the tip for the day. Look at the difference between the two. This one is much closer to the color of the surface grain than this one is. Big difference. Again, with the Douglas fir, big difference between the two. And you can't sand this enough. You'll have to cut that off to lighten it up. Next time you're doing your project, make sure that you try to keep the end grain the same color as your surface. Your project will look a lot nicer for it. Well, I hope this little tip will help you with your project next time. Nobody likes that black end grain on their project. Keep safe, keep your fingers out of the saws, and I'll catch you next time. Thanks for watching.